On the outside, I was smiling. On the inside, I was begging for help. Have you ever felt like this? Like you were in the middle of a crowd, but still completely alone? Like everyone saw only what you showed them, and no one even imagined what was going on behind your tired eyes? The truth is that there are pains that leave no visible marks, wounds that don't bleed, but that remain open, night after night. And the hardest part of all is when no one notices, no one asks, no one understands. For a long time I was exactly that person, the soldier who came back from war but didn't come back whole. The external battle was over, but inside me, the fight was just beginning. And perhaps the worst battlefield is the one that no one sees, where the shrapnel is made of memories, the shots come from silence, and the war never ends. I would sit at the table with my family, say, "It's okay," participate in the conversations, but inside, I would scream, and that scream would never echo. It would never be heard. People looked at me and said, "You're lucky to be back, and you're strong, and you won." But they didn't know what it meant to wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, reliving scenes I would give anything to forget. They didn't know that sometimes the hardest part of my day was simply getting out of bed. They didn't know that even when I was far from the battlefield, my body reacted as if it were still there. Every shadow, every louder sound, every moment of silence, it all took me back. Maybe you know this kind of pain too. The kind that has no name, that is not easily explained, but that lives inside and weighs on you. And maybe you have learned to hide it, to disguise it, to pretend that you have overcome it. I know what it is like. You keep quiet, you distance yourself, you create masks that protect you, but that also imprison you. And little by little you start to believe that it is easier to remain silent than to try to make someone understand what you cannot even explain properly. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover now may surprise you. It's not about war, it's about what war leaves behind. It's not just about soldiers, it's about anyone who has ever had their soul wounded and tried to move on even without knowing how. It's about invisible scars, about pain that no one sees but that shapes who we are. Because the day everything started to change wasn't when the war ended. It was when I finally decided to tell my story. And it wasn't easy, but it was liberating. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. That's when I finally decided to tell my story. And it wasn't easy, but it was liberating. Because at that moment when the words finally left my mouth, still trembling, still afraid, something inside me began to reorganize itself. It wasn't magic, it wasn't quick, but it was true. And the truth has this power. It doesn't erase the pain, but it brings light where before there was only darkness. I realized that by telling the truth, I wasn't just freeing myself, I was also allowing other people to recognize themselves. Because there are many people living silent wars. Wars that don't show up in diagnoses or on x-rays, but that destroy us from within. And maybe now as you hear this, you are remembering something that you have never been able to put into words. A silence that also hurts you, a pain that you have learned to carry in silence. If this subject resonates with you, leave here in the comments what has touched you the most so far. It could be a memory, a question, a phrase. Sometimes what you share may be exactly what someone needs to read today, to not feel so alone in this invisible battle. And if this content touched you in any way, if it made you feel understood, or if it just made you want to keep hearing stories like this video, it may seem like just a click, but it shows that this message needs to continue, that stories like this have value, that giving a voice to invisible scars is important. Oh, and if you believe the world needs to hear more truths like this, with respect, empathy, and depth, subscribe to the channel. This is how this community grows. This is how we continue to bring stories that heal, that touch, and that make us look at others with more compassion. Your participation here is what makes this space exist, what transforms this video into something alive, pulsating, real, because we are not alone, and the more we share, the more bridges we build. And it was by building these bridges that I began to realize how far I had drifted away from the real world. Not physically, I was there, walking the streets, sitting at the table with my family, participating in conversations, but my soul, that one, seemed to have stayed back there, on the battlefield. When the plane landed, and my feet touched the ground of my homeland, there were people waiting with flags, hugs, and smiles. And I tried to smile too, but inside, it was as if I was out of place, as if I had returned to the wrong world. People celebrated my return. They called me a hero. They said that now I could rest, rebuild my life, move forward. But no one saw what was happening inside me. No one knew that every quiet corner hid memories that came back like a rush. That when I closed my eyes, the silence of the night became a deafening echo of memories. What no one told me, and what you may have discovered on your own, is that the body can return from war, but the soul sometimes refuses to leave. Everything seemed out of rhythm. The city was moving along in a hurry. People talked about everyday problems, work, traffic, soap operas. And all I could think about was how bizarre it was that life had gone on while, on the other side of the world, I struggled to survive every day. It was as if there were two parallel worlds and I had been trapped between the two. Neither there anymore, nor completely here. An invisible exile. And the cruelest part is that on the outside, everything seemed fine. I had no visible injuries. I didn't use crutches, I didn't cry in public. So to everyone else I was fine. But there was a fracture inside that no one could see. A crack in my soul that kept me constantly on alert. As if something bad was about to happen. It's like living in a constant state of waiting. Waiting for danger even when there isn't any. This kind of silent tension consumes you. And the worst part is that you learn to hide it so well that you start to forget what it's like to live without that weight. I felt like I had to relearn how to be human. Relearn how to look someone in the eye without looking for a threat. How to sleep without having to have one eye open. How to trust that a loud noise didn't mean danger. Relearn how to relate to the people I loved, even when I couldn't feel anything at all. Because the truth is that trauma doesn't come with a manual. It slowly creeps in, taking up space, until one day you realize that you're just existing, but not living. The hardest part of all this is that you start to believe that the problem is you, that you are weak, that you shouldn't feel these things, that you should be grateful that you're back, and then you shut up. You start to distance yourself. You hide behind excuses, long silences, mechanical laughter, because it's easier to appear okay than to have to explain why, even after everything is over, you still feel like you're trapped inside an emotional trench. Many people around me had good intentions, but they said things like, "You need to get over it. Time heals everything. It's just a phase." But no one talked about the hidden truth. Time alone does not heal what we refuse to face. Healing requires presence. It requires naming the pain. And to do that, it takes courage. Because telling someone requires more strength than any fight. Facing your own ghosts is a battle that begins within and sometimes needs to be fought every day. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there's something that almost no one talks about. The impact of returning to a place that no longer knows how to welcome you. The confusion of feelings when you meet familiar faces with a transformed soul. The weight of no longer fitting into the same places, the same conversations, the same life that was waiting for you, without knowing that the person who would return would not be exactly the same person who left. Comment here. I'm on this journey too. I want to know who else carries these invisible scars and continues to try to rebuild their own peace, one step at a time. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there's something I learned the hard way. Silence has weight. And this weight isn't symbolic. It's physical, emotional, mental. It builds up on your shoulders, in your breathing, in your sleepless nights. Some people think silence is light, that it's rest. But when it's born of pain, it becomes a prison. And this prison becomes tighter and tighter, suffocating, until you don't know how to get out. Waking up sweating in the middle of the night, with my heart beating as if it were about to explode, was something that had become routine. The room was silent, but inside my mind the noise was deafening. It was as if everything I had stored up over the days decided to scream at night. There were no real explosions, but my body reacted as if I were there again, in the middle of the chaos. And no one saw it, and that's the most distressing thing. No one sees it, because there's no exposed wound, no bandage, no visible fracture. It's the invisible pain that takes over, and you try to hide it, try to appear normal, try to smile. But that distant look gives it all away. That moment when you seem present but you're already far away, immersed in thoughts that not even you can decipher. Those who have never been through this may not understand, but those who have know exactly what I'm saying. And at first I thought it was just a phase, that maybe it was just accumulated fatigue, that it would pass with time. But the days started to drag on. The things that used to excite me lost their sparkle, and I realized that I was starting to avoid people, places, conversations. Socializing became effort. Presence became acting. It was as if I was constantly playing a version of myself that no longer existed. This silent distancing is treacherous, because in the eyes of others you are just more in your own world, but inside you are fading away. It is as if something inside you is being eroded, day after day, and every time you swallow an emotion, every time you hide a symptom, you leave a part of yourself behind. And the most painful thing is that the more you remain silent, the less people notice, and the less they notice, the more invisible you feel. There was a point when I started to doubt myself. I started to think that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe I was weak, that I shouldn't feel this way. But that's one of the great pitfalls of trauma. It distorts your perception. It makes you question yourself all the time. And in that confusion, you start to do what you think is expected of you. Move on, without complaining, without showing vulnerability. But the body doesn't lie. The mind even tries to mask it, rationalize it, pretend that everything is fine. But the body speaks. Constant insomnia, muscle tension, fatigue that doesn't go away, no matter how much you rest, hypervigilance, which makes you analyze every environment as if something bad is going to happen. All of these are warnings, clear signs that something needs to be looked at truthfully with courage. But how can you look if no one around you sees it? This lack of listening and validation hurts more than many people realize, because when no one notices your pain, you start to believe that it doesn't matter. And when you believe that it doesn't matter, you start to nullify yourself. You start to exist only on autopilot. And that's when the risk becomes more serious. Because you no longer feel worthy of help. You no longer feel worthy of care. And that's where many people get lost. The cruelest thing is that you often feel guilty for feeling what you feel. Because you look around and see other people living, working, smiling. And then you think, if they can do it, why can't I? But no one sees what goes on behind the scenes. No one sees the hidden truth of your journey. What you went through, what you had to endure in silence, what was engraved in you silently but permanently. And then, even when someone asks if you're okay, your automatic response is, everything's fine, because it seems easier to remain invisible than to open the door to an inner world that you don't even fully understand. But the problem is that this silence takes its toll. It takes over everything. Your relationships, your health, your ability to feel pleasure, to be moved by simple things. It steals your presence in the present moment. That's why telling your story becomes an act of resistance. Not as an exposure, but as a liberation. Naming what hurts you, giving form to what seemed vague, is like turning on a light in a room you thought was locked forever. That's why every word spoken with sincerity carries weight. And more than that, it has an impact. An impact on the listener, but also on the speaker. Silence can teach us many things. It can be sacred, it can be necessary. But when it arises from unwelcome pain, it distances us from everything that is alive. And I needed to lose myself in this silence to understand how vital it is to find ways of expression, acceptance, and reconstruction. Write it down. That makes sense to me. If you have also felt the weight of this silence that no one sees, but that lives inside. Because sometimes all we need is to know that we are not alone on this journey. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a silent phase in this journey where we desperately try to appear normal. The internal war is still going on, but on the outside the world demands functionality, and that is when the most exhausting effort begins. Pretending that everything is fine, pretending that you came back in one piece, pretending that you can follow the game even without understanding the rules anymore. I remember the first family gatherings after I returned. Everyone was there, smiling, telling stories, asking light questions. Are you enjoying being back? And now, what are your plans? I would respond with rehearsed phrases, laugh at the right moments, even joke around. But inside, every second was a battle. I felt out of place. It was as if everyone was speaking a language that I no longer understood. I would observe, listen, but I couldn't connect. And once again I would withdraw. This attempt to fit into a world that no longer represents you is one of the loneliest parts of the process, because the pain you carry doesn't fit into everyday conversations. How do you explain that being in a crowded supermarket can put you on alert, as if it were a risk zone? How do you tell someone that a simple honk can tear you away from a good memory and throw you back into a moment of terror? There's no room for that kind of truth in social circles, so you keep it to yourself. You swallow it. You repeat to yourself, behave, be strong, hide it. So you go to parties, accept invitations, attend meetings, but you're not really there. It's like you're behind glass watching everything happen but not feeling it. Participating becomes a mechanical act. Talking requires effort. Smiling becomes part of the performance. And when it's over, the tiredness isn't just physical, it's emotional, it's existential. You go home feeling even emptier than when you left. Trying to maintain a semblance of normality requires you to put on a mask. And the problem is that over time, we get so used to wearing it that we start to forget our own faces. We try to get jobs that don't make sense. We commit to routines that suffocate us. We force ourselves to repeat optimistic phrases that don't reflect what we really feel, all in an attempt to fit into a system that wasn't made for us after what we've been through. But there is a price, a real impact. Because when you live in this constant disconnection, your identity begins to dissolve. You no longer know what you like, what you feel, what you believe. You start living on autopilot, just to avoid questions, judgments, strange looks. And when we lose ourselves, life becomes a soulless script. You wake up, fulfill your obligations, smile for photos, but you know that you are failing yourself. And the cruelest part is that this cycle repeats itself. You realize that you can't fit in, but you also don't know how to get out of it. So you push a little harder. You try harder. You give yourself over to relationships that don't see you, to jobs that demand performance but don't offer support, all in the hope of finding some fragment of belonging again. And each failed attempt becomes another silent reminder that something inside is still hurting. This is the part of the journey that no one sees, the backstage of the soul, the part where the transformation seems distant, but is beginning almost imperceptibly. Because even in these moments of effort and pain, there is something inside you that still wants to be whole, that still believes that there is another way to live, that despite the tiredness, continues to try to find meaning. And that's why talking about this is so important, because there are so many people out there right now living in this silent survival mode, feeling like they don't fit in, but pretending to perfection, creating a version of themselves for the world and hiding behind it. And that's not weakness. That's trying to keep going, trying to maintain some semblance of structure, while their soul cries out for help. What I've learned over time, and through many falls along the way, is that trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for you is the same as abandoning who you really are. And as challenging as it may be, there is strength in acknowledging this misalignment. There is power in admitting that you're trying but that it still hurts, that you're present but still feel distant. Write it down. I'm trying to find myself. Because only those who have tried too hard to look good understand the weight of keeping a mask tight while inside everything is being rebuilt. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a moment, silent and inevitable, when everything that has been pushed inside begins to leak through the cracks. And it is not always a dramatic or cinematic moment. Sometimes it is just a different kind of tiredness, a lost look in the mirror, a sigh that is longer than usual. Sometimes, all it takes is for someone to ask, "Are you okay?" with a little more truth, and what has been held back for so long collapses without warning. That is exactly what happened to me. I don't remember the exact phrase. I don't remember if it was on a regular Monday or a random weekend, but I remember the feeling, like a dam had broken inside, and I, who had always been so good at controlling, at holding back, at following the script, simply couldn't hold the weight any longer. It was as if every attempt to appear strong had slowly emptied me. And there, without being able to pretend, without being able to respond with a smile, everything came flooding back at once. I cried like I hadn't cried in years, but it wasn't an ordinary cry. It was a silent scream, a full-body cry, the kind you can't hold back even if you want to. It was the accumulated pain, the disguised fear, the mourning for everything I had lost, including parts of myself, and at that moment, I realized that keeping it in was destroying me, that pretending wasn't protecting me. It was making me sick. The strangest thing is that, even in my breakdown, I felt relieved. For the first time, I stopped acting. For the first time, I let someone see what I had been hiding for so long, and it wasn't easy. Shame came along with it, as did the fear of judgment. But there was a gap there, a space between the pain and the relief where something new began to form. The chance for transformation, the possibility of no longer having to carry everything alone. It's funny how a breaking point can actually be the starting point, because when you reach your limit, you can't ignore it anymore. And although it may seem like the end, it can be the beginning of something real. The crisis didn't give me immediate answers, But it clearly showed me a hidden truth. The silence I was carrying wasn't protection, it was a prison, and to get out of there, I would have to do something I had always feared: speak out. But speaking doesn't mean knowing exactly what to say. It doesn't require pretty words or clear explanations. Sometimes, it's just about admitting, I'm not okay. Sometimes it's just about allowing the pain to have a name. And even if the other person doesn't completely understand, just being heard changes everything. It's as if, for the first time, we stop being invisible. It's as if the pain finally has a place outside of us. I remember being silent after that outburst. A silence different from what I had known. It wasn't heavy or oppressive. It was a new space. A silence of rest, as if I had released something that no longer fit inside me. And in that space, a new perception began to emerge. Maybe I don't need to go back to being who I was before. Maybe this isn't the way forward. Maybe what I really need is to start a new version of myself. More honest, more real, more whole. And this turning point doesn't happen all at once. It's not magic, it's a process. It's a timid step followed by a stumble. It's a conversation interrupted by tears. It's an attempt to open up and then the fear of having said too much. But even with fear, even without guarantees, it's the only path I've found that leads to some real healing, because it's in exposing the wound that care becomes possible. And I know that there are many people who, like me, have found themselves at this breaking point. That moment when you either explode or implode, when you realize that you can no longer continue on autopilot, that something needs to change, even if it's just the way you look at yourself. That's when the turning point begins. Not when everything is resolved, but when you decide to stop hiding. When you allow yourself to feel, even without knowing where it will lead. Write it down. I have reached my limit. If you have also experienced that moment when your body and soul said enough, because this recognition, however painful it may seem, can be the gateway to a new stage in your journey. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the moment when we decide to tell what we've spent so long hiding is not easy. It's courageous, but also scary. It's liberating, but equally disconcerting. When I decided to talk, it wasn't because I felt ready. It was because I couldn't bear the weight alone anymore. And as strange as it may seem, that step towards vulnerability was born precisely out of exhaustion. I no longer had the strength to pretend. It wasn't a planned gesture nor a rehearsed speech. It was just a small opening, almost a whisper. I can't hold it all in anymore. The person who listened to me that day didn't have all the answers. He didn't offer me any magic solutions, nor did he try to fix my pain. He just listened, without interrupting, without changing the subject, without trying to fix what I couldn't even explain properly yet. And that was enough for me to understand that perhaps it was possible to exist outside of silence. For the first time, I felt like my pain belonged somewhere, that I could speak and still be respected, that I could feel and still be worthy of presence. But at the same time that I felt this relief, a fear that I hadn't expected also emerged. The fear of having exposed myself too much, of having said something I shouldn't have, of being seen as weak, incapable, or a problem. This is when the mindset shaped by trauma tries to sabotage any stage of healing. We open up, but then we shrink back. We wait for some punishment, some strange look, some rejection, as if being honest was dangerous. And for a long time, I carried this belief that my pain was too much for others, that no one could deal with it without distancing themselves. That's why, after that first conversation, I stayed silent for days again, as if I needed to assess the damage. But to my surprise, there was no distancing. There was a closeness. The person came back to me. He asked how I was. He remembered what I had said. And there, in that repetition of care, something began to reorganize itself inside me. It wasn't just about having told. It was about having been seen, about knowing that even after having shown my shadows, someone chose to stay. And that made me realize a hidden truth. Often, what heals us is not the answers, but the presence. It's not someone telling you what to do, but someone having the courage to stay, even if they don't understand everything. When I decided to open my heart, I wasn't just letting go of what I had kept inside. I was also testing whether there was room for my humanity in the real world, and discovering that there was changed everything. After that first step, others came. Shy conversations with people I trusted, words scribbled in a notebook, therapy sessions where I arrived tense and left feeling lighter. None of them were easy, but they were all necessary. because each time I allowed myself to tell a little more of my story, something inside me took shape. I began to listen to myself more honestly. I began to name pains that before only existed as a diffuse weight. And that didn't make me more fragile. It made me more real. There is something powerful in the decision to tell someone. It's like saying to yourself, I deserve to be heard. And that decision changes the course. Because until then, everything revolved around hiding, maintaining control, appearing invulnerable. But when you allow yourself to break that cycle, a space for reconstruction is born. The pain is still there, but now it has air. It can breathe. And that changes the way it behaves. It stops eating away in silence and starts being processed with care. Speaking in this context is much more than just letting off steam. It is an affirmation of existence. It is a movement of resistance against everything that told us it was better to keep quiet. It is an act of trust, not only in the other person, but also in yourself. Because trusting that your story has value, that your experience deserves space, is the first step towards transforming what seemed unbearable into something that can be overcome. And it's not about telling just anyone or opening up on impulse. It's about recognizing the moment when keeping it to yourself is no longer viable. It's about choosing someone, or even a blank piece of paper, to witness what hurts, but also needs to come out. The important thing is that in this movement, something starts to change. Not immediately, but for real. You start to listen to yourself in a different way. And over time, you start to realize that you are no longer a hostage to what once seemed bigger than you. Write it down. Speaking was also my first step. If you've ever felt that relief mixed with fear, that small gesture that begins to set you free. Because sometimes all we need is a safe space to say, I exist and what I feel matters. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because once we decide to talk, a new chapter in this journey begins, and oftentimes, it's more challenging than it seems. Because talking doesn't solve everything. Talking isn't a button that, when pressed, turns off the pain. It's just the beginning. And the beginning, as you know, can be confusing. After I got that weight off my chest, I expected, perhaps without realizing it, that the world around me would react with the same relief I was feeling. But that's not how it happened. Not everyone knew how to react. Some people were visibly uncomfortable, as if they didn't know where to put their hands, as if my pain was too big a subject to be discussed out loud. Some listened in silence, and then changed the subject as if I had been talking about the weather. Others walked away, not out of malice but because they didn't know how to deal with it. And at first it hurt. It made me wonder if I had done the right thing. It made me question, again, if my pain was really something that should be exposed. But that's when something important started to happen. Among those who retreated, there were also those who came closer, people I hadn't expected, people who had perhaps never been through anything like this, but who knew how to listen, who had the gift of acceptance, of real presence. They didn't try to fix anything, they didn't offer ready-made solutions, but they stayed. And staying, at that moment, was all I needed. It was in this contrast that I realized that not all distancing is rejection. Sometimes it's just a reflection of the other person's limitations. Not everyone is ready to dive into deep waters, and that's okay. Understanding this helped me not to turn other people's reactions into a measure of my worth. It made me see that speaking my truth wasn't about the validation that would come later, but about my commitment to myself. Because in the end, the decision to show oneself can't depend on others' acceptance. It needs to come from the urgency of living with more truth. Of course, I won't lie. It still hurts when you open up and the other person doesn't know what to do with it. It still gives you a lump in your throat when you realize you're talking to someone who only listens with their ears, not their heart. But at the same time, there's a silent growth in this experience. Because every time you show yourself and remain whole, even in the face of indifference, discomfort, or distance, you strengthen your relationship with your own story. You learn to validate what you feel, even when the world doesn't respond as you expected. And it is in this new phase that something deeper begins, the reconstruction of your place in the world. Once you allow yourself to speak and find someone who listens, even if they are few, a new type of bond begins to form. A bond that is born from shared truth. A type of relationship that does not require a mask, that does not force performance. Relationships where you do not need to be fine all the time to be accepted. Where pain does not scare, but brings you closer. Where vulnerability is not weakness but a bridge. From there, other changes begin to happen almost without you noticing. You start to surround yourself with the right people. You You start to create spaces where you can breathe without fear of being misunderstood. Your mindset itself changes. You stop seeking constant approval and start seeking real connection. You stop trying to please everyone and start nurturing the few but true bonds that help you grow. This phase requires choices. Difficult choices sometimes. You will realize that some friendships no longer have a place in your life, that certain environments make you sick, that some conversations are always monologues disguised as dialogue. And it's okay to let that go. Because when you align with your truth, everything that is false begins to lose its meaning. You stop tolerating what doesn't feed you emotionally. And that is a fundamental part of the transformation. It's not about becoming someone else, nor about erasing the past. It's about continuing to be yourself, but without the burden of having to hide the most human parts of your story. It's about understanding that living truthfully can scare others, but above all, it frees you. The pain still exists, but now it has a name, a space, and a place to be heard. It no longer defines you. It's part of you, but it doesn't limit you. And that's when a new strength begins to emerge. A silent courage that is born every time you choose transparency, even knowing that not everyone will understand. Because what matters is not how many people applaud you. What matters is being able to look at yourself and know, I was true to what I felt. I honored my journey, and that in itself changes everything. Comment here. That makes sense to me. If you have also realized that even when not everyone understands, the choice to show yourself continues to be the most powerful way to free yourself. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is something that few people talk about honestly. The process of rebuilding is not pretty, at least not at first. It doesn't come with soft background music or inspiring phrases. The truth is that it starts in a place that is almost colorless, where everything still seems confusing. The only certainty you have is that you can no longer continue living the way you were, and even then, you have no idea how to move forward. It is on this shaky ground that something new begins, and it almost always begins with a silent decision. I don't want to run away from myself anymore. I remember exactly how it felt to enter a therapy room for the first time. The atmosphere was calm, but inside me everything was at war. My body was seated, but my heart was restless, as if to say, can I really show myself here? For years, I avoided any space that put me in front of myself, but that day, I decided to face it, and it wasn't easy. My words came out truncated as if each sentence had to cross a barrier of years of silence. I didn't know where to start. I just knew that I had to start. In the first sessions, I felt exposed, strange, almost childish, as if I was learning to speak again. But little by little, I realized that it wasn't about having answers. It was about having space. A space where I could exist without having to put on any armor. It was there, in that safe environment, that I began to reorganize my truths, understanding the behind-the-scenes pain I carried, recognizing that it wasn't madness nor weakness. It was history. It was consequence. It was survival. Over time, I understood that I didn't have to walk this path alone. Even though the trauma taught me to distrust everything and everyone, there were people who knew how to walk alongside me without intruding. Some of these people were professionals. Others were kind souls who crossed my path at the right moments. People who didn't run away when I talked about pain, who didn't minimize my crises, who knew how to listen to what I couldn't always say out loud. And this network gradually formed. A group here, a welcoming conversation there, and that's how the healing began to take shape. I had good days, days when I thought I was winning everything, but I also had dark days, long nights when memories came back like sharp knives. And even in those moments, the difference was that now I knew where to put my feet. I had tools. I had practices that grounded me, conscious breathing, therapeutic writing, short meditations, a verse that sustained me. They weren't magic solutions, but they were threads of light in the darkness. And then came faith, not that rigid faith with ready-made formulas or memorized phrases, but a silent faith, built in the midst of pain. A faith that didn't promise that everything would pass, but reminded me that I wasn't alone. A presence that surrounded me in moments when no one else could reach me. It was this faith that kept me going on days when my body was tired, when my mind was weak, when the world outside seemed indifferent to what I felt inside. Participating in listening groups was also a turning point. In each story told, I found fragments of my own, and even without knowing those people deeply, something united us. The courage to be real, to talk about what many prefer to hide. To admit that, yes, we still feel fear, guilt, emptiness, but that despite that, we carry on. Listening to others healed me in parts that I didn't even know were hurt. Because there, between sincere stories and teary eyes, I discovered that I wasn't the only one trying to pick up the pieces. My mindset changed. I stopped seeing myself as someone broken and started seeing myself as someone who was rebuilding, and that made all the difference. I started respecting my limits, saying no without guilt, celebrating small victories that would have gone unnoticed before, a day of peace, a full night's sleep, an honest conversation without fear. Simple things, but that gained new value when seen through the lens of presence. And with this new vision, pain lost its role as an enemy and became a teacher, a tough but fair teacher, who showed me what needed to be looked at truthfully, who taught me to stop running away, to take responsibility for what I felt, to understand that the past could no longer be changed, but could be understood, integrated, and embraced. And when this began to happen, a new way of life revealed itself before me. I started to feel pleasure in the little things again. The smell of coffee, the sun shining through the window, the touch of cold water on my face in the morning. Moments that had previously gone unnoticed were now small reminders that life can be more than just endurance. It can be presence. It can be lightness. It can even be beautiful, even with scars. Today I know that my story is not a burden. It is fertile soil where fruits of empathy, compassion, and depth grow. My pain does not define me, but it has shaped me. It has made me more human. And that is why I carry on, not as someone who has overcome everything, but as someone who chooses every day to no longer hide. Write it down. I'm rebuilding calmly. If you are also learning to live without rushing, respecting your time, recognizing your failures, and celebrating each step of your transformation. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because there comes a time when something changes place within us. What was once just pain now becomes a bridge. What was once just a burden now also supports others. And when we least expect it, our story, the same one that was so often silenced out of shame or fear, begins to find purpose. It begins to make an impact. And that was honestly one of the most transformative things I've ever experienced. Because for a long time I just wanted to forget. I just wanted what I had been through to disappear from my memory like a bad dream. I avoided talking. I avoided remembering. I even avoided feeling. I thought that silence was the best way to move on. But life showed me with a lot of patience and some harshness that what we hide swallows us up, and what we share, little by little, sets us free. The first time I told my story in an open group, my hands were shaking. My heart was pounding as if I were about to enter a battle, and in a way I was. It was the battle between staying hidden or allowing my truth to come out of my mouth, with all the imperfections, pauses, and uncertainties that it carried. And when I finished speaking, there was no applause. There was silence, a silence filled with tears in my eyes, with identification, with empathy. People who didn't say poor thing, but I understand. People who didn't see me as broken but as someone who had courage. It was there that I understood that my pain no longer needed to be a secret, that what I experienced, no matter how hard it was, could become a path for others, that I could be what I lacked back then, someone who welcomes, who listens, who understands. And little by little, this movement gained strength, sometimes in coffee conversations, other times in messages that arrived on social media, or even in silent glances exchanged with someone who, just by hearing a piece of my journey, found the courage to look at their own. And that changed everything. It changed the way I relate to life. Before, I felt like someone who carried a past that was too heavy to show. Today, I understand that every part of this story has value, not because it made me suffer, but because it taught me. It taught me to have compassion. It taught me not to judge what I don't understand. It taught me the importance of creating spaces where people don't have to pretend they're okay. It taught me that vulnerability, contrary to what many say, is not weakness. It's strength that chooses to be honest. And it's funny how, the more I talked, the more people came closer, not to hear stories of pain out of curiosity, but because there was something true there, something that touched, something that freed. I began to realize that we live surrounded by people who carry silent burdens, who walk around smiling on the outside and screaming on the inside. And often, all these people need is someone to say, I know what it's like, and I'm here. From that point on, I decided to turn my story into a space for listening. Instead of running away from it, I turned it into a shelter. And that's when it started to make sense in a new way. Because there is a kind of purpose that only arises when pain finds a purpose. When what broke you also serves to rebuild someone else. When, without wanting to, you become a witness that it is possible to get through. Not unharmed, not intact, but with dignity, with truth, with depth. Today, I am no longer afraid to say what I have experienced. Because I know that there is strength in my vulnerability. I know that each scar I carry can be a beacon for those who are still in the dark. And this is not about being an example. It is about being a presence. It is about making it clear that no one needs to carry everything alone. That no matter how long the path may seem, there are people willing to walk it together. And the beauty of it all is that the more I connected with this listening mission, the more I healed myself too. Not because my story changed, but because the place where it lives inside me is now different. Today it doesn't imprison me, it drives me. And even when the memory comes back, because it does, I know that I am no longer that person trapped in the trauma. I am someone in constant transformation, and that changes everything. The hidden truth that few realize is that, when you choose to share, you also invite others to do the same. And when that happens, the environment changes, relationships change, conversations take on a different texture. Everything becomes deeper, because when pain is named, it stops paralyzing us. It becomes the raw material for something new, for a more sensitive, more connected, more alive version of ourselves. And that's why I keep telling you, not because I like revisiting the past, but because I know there's someone, somewhere, who needs to hear that it's possible to get out of this hole, who needs to know that they're not going crazy, that they're not alone, that yes, it will still hurt sometimes, but that there's room to breathe, and that, just that, is worth the effort. It's worth the journey. Comment here. That makes sense to me. If you also believe that a story, no matter how painful, can be the key that frees another person from silence. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because after everything, after the pain, the silence, the reconstruction, the choice to tell, an inevitable question arises. A question that insists on remaining when we allow ourselves to stop for a moment and breathe. What about you? What part of your story is still silent? Because no matter where you are on your journey right now, whether you are hiding, whether you are about to speak, whether you have already started to rebuild, or whether you are still lying on the ground, this question remains valid. What has yet to be said? What is still pulsing inside, waiting for a space where it can finally exist with dignity? For a long time, I thought my story was too big, too intense, too shameful, and what I didn't realize was that this judgment was born inside me, fed by a mindset that learned from an early age that feeling was dangerous, that talking was weakness, that showing pain was a sign of imbalance. But do you know what I learned over time? That what we hide doesn't disappear, it grows. It takes root in the wrong place, and one day it overflows, through harsh words, disguised isolation, chronic fatigue, sleepless nights, and the constant feeling of not being whole anywhere. That's why asking yourself, what part of my story is still silent, is a courageous gesture. Because we're not always clear about this. Sometimes what's silent is not a specific event but an old feeling, a feeling of abandonment that was never named, a sadness that became a landscape, a fear that you learned to carry as if it were part of your body, and all of this deserves to be looked at, not in a hurry, not with obligation, but with the same delicacy that you would offer to someone you love deeply, because you deserve to be heard too. Maybe you haven't allowed yourself to look at this yet because you feel like you have no one to tell, or because you've tried before and were discredited. Maybe you've heard phrases like, it's all in your head, you're exaggerating, it'll pass, it's just a phase. And these phrases, said without malice, can be devastating. They make you doubt yourself. They make it seem like what you feel is invalid. But let me tell you something with all the truth that I carry today. If it hurts you, it matters. If it weighs on you, it needs space. If it gets to you, it deserves to be respected. Creating this space within and around yourself is one of the most powerful acts of transformation that anyone can do. It doesn't have to be for everyone. It doesn't have to be a public speech. It can be in a conversation with a trusted person. It can be on a piece of paper. It can be in a whispered prayer at night. It can be a silent outburst between you and the mirror, with teary eyes and trembling hands. The important thing is not to let your story remain bottled up, piled up deep in your soul, accumulating layers of silence that suffocate more than they protect. When we give voice to what hurts, something changes. We change. Our outlook changes. The way we walk through the world changes. Because now you know that you don't have to pretend to be okay all the time. That you can have difficult days and still be moving forward. That your pain doesn't isolate you. It can connect you. Because there are thousands of people going through invisible struggles feeling alone, pretending to be strong while they scream inside. And when you allow yourself to be real, you shine a light on this dark path. A light that doesn't shine alone, but that encourages others to do the same. And that, in itself, already begins to heal. It's not about turning pain into a spectacle. It's about giving it a legitimate place in your story. It's about not letting it become a ghost inside you. Because ghosts haunt, but pain that is embraced teaches. And more than that, it matures. It brings you closer to what is essential. It shows you that there is life after chaos, that there is still beauty possible, even when the world falls apart inside. And that's exactly where strength begins to manifest itself, in the choice to continue even when everything inside you asks for silence, in the decision to trust, even after being hurt, in the courage to rebuild yourself piece by piece with your own hands. Sometimes you'll take one step forward and 2 steps back. You'll wonder if you're moving forward or just spinning in circles. But trust me, every step counts. Every small choice to care. Every time you decide to breathe instead of run. Every word you say with truth. It all adds up. Every gesture of listening. Every tear you embrace. Every memory you choose to face without running away. That's healing in action. And true healing isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of awareness. I'm not saying that talking solves everything, but it solves something. It solves the weight of pretending. It solves the lump in your throat. It solves that feeling of being the only one who feels what you feel. And most importantly, it solves the feeling of being on the margins of your own life. Telling someone is reconnecting. It's coming home. It's taking a step towards what is true. And the truth, even when it hurts, frees. It frees the body from rigidity, frees the mind from confusion, frees the heart from shame. And it is this freedom, achieved little by little, that changes the way we move through the world. So if you also carry something that no one sees, something that still lives in the dark, write in the comments. I understand this pain. It's not just a phrase. It's a silent code for those who recognize, for those who have been through it, for those who are still going through it. Let's create together a space where no one needs to pretend to be okay all the time, where sincerity is more important than appearance, where pain is respected and healing even if slow is possible. If you've made it this far, truly, thank you. It means that this story touched you somewhere deep inside, and perhaps it awakened memories, reflections, or even that silence that we learned to maintain. This shows that you are not alone, that there is, indeed, a possible space where pain can be heard with respect and truth. If this content made you feel lighter, more seen, or simply more connected to something you carry, leave a like here. Not because it's an automatic gesture, but because it shows me that this conversation needs to continue. And if you want to join us on this journey of listening, acceptance, and transformation, subscribe to the channel. Here we talk about things that many avoid, but with depth, care, and humanity. And if you stayed with me until the end, comment below. I'm with you until the end. It will be good to know who was on the other side, sharing this moment, building together this safe space of truth and listening. There is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there. The conversation is not over yet.